I ended up having a lot to say about the new iPhones, and it starts, perhaps appropriately, with this base model. And while it might seem simple enough because the iPhone 15 doesn't have all of the bells and the whistles, that fact alone made me think a little bit more critically about Apple's overall strategy moving forward. So, it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Here's what worked and what didn't with the iPhone 15. There was something I found interesting after all of the releases this past month. I tend to use an iPhone and an Android phone at any given point at the same time, and the iPhone that ended up being in my pocket more was this one, the smaller one. Sure, that probably means that I was wanting to keep things minimal because I carry two devices anyway, but I think that it speaks to an innate desire that I and many other people continue to have, the desire for smaller tech. I mean, sure, I have the iPhone 15 Pro Max, and I'm loving it because I tend to fall into that category of pro user. But when it comes to just daily usage, I really just want something that is easy and just works. Those are terms that are usually levied towards iPhones, and that is certainly true for the iPhone 15. Now, while the iPhone 15 Pro and the Pro Max get that new titanium build, the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus keep things aluminum. I have talked about how the Pro Max actually feels really light despite everything it has going for it, and that material change probably makes up for all of the extra internal bits otherwise weighing the phone down. That is less the case with the iPhone 15 because it has less of the craziness going on underneath the surface, so aluminum here is still just fine. At the very least, you still have the same matted feel that is enjoyed on the natural titanium iPhone 15 Pro Max that I have. Honestly, I just wish that this green looked a little bit more green. With a screen size of 6.1 inches, the iPhone 15 really toes the line between being large enough for viewing enjoyment and small enough to be easily pocketable. It has to strike the right medium because technically it is the smallest offering on hand now. After all, the mini iPhones are no longer a thing, so if you really want a small Apple smartphone, you have to go for the much less feature-rich iPhone SE. Thankfully, there are enough things that make the iPhone 15 an actual upgrade for people who are using last year's model. Performance increases are notable via the A16 Bionic, which is a proper upgrade from last year's A15. We gotta talk about it, the USB-C port that now comes this year and is a significant change that will affect longtime iPhone users, but I'll get to that in a little bit. And then there's the inclusion of the Dynamic Island. This is kind of the flashy update, providing a new way of multitasking. It can keep some apps in the background and show bits of information from them where applicable, and that is pretty handy when you want to go right back to certain applications, like for example YouTube, which would be back there, or you want to keep an eye on certain other pieces of info like how far your Uber might be. Having the Dynamic Island here certainly helps put all of the iPhones in a more recognizable lineup. The thing is, the Dynamic Island might fit a little too well in the base model iPhones because the base models now feel more like an island than ever. Sure, it's good that there are some features the base model iPhone gets that are similar to the Pros. However, there's also a laundry list of things that the base models do not get, which might lead to some self-induced Apple FOMO. For one, there is the omission of the action button. What we have here is still the same silence toggle that we've had in many iPhones up until now. You see, it's interesting that Apple makes a big deal about having a new input because iPhone users were craving something different, only for them to not even bother trying to put it on the base model iPhones. Instead, we have the silence toggle, which is still a tactile addition that is welcome, but it remains a one-trick pony. Compare that to the action button that can actually be made to do way more than just shut the phone up. And while the Dynamic Island is a worthwhile update to the general iOS experience, the fact remains that the rest of the display around it is not as smart. Despite the display tech being largely similar between the base and the Pro models, Apple simply won't let the iPhone 15 have an always-on display. I get that this display probably wouldn't get like the high refresh rate or some of the color rendering, but the always-on display is just one of those features that makes the iPhone experience simply better. And the last thing that puts the base models in their own island is actually deeper than all of this. Apple seems to be really widening the gap between Pro and everything else, and that is no more evident than with the processors in each. The A16 Bionic that is in the iPhone 15 is no slouch, don't get me wrong, and it can withstand all of the work and play that pretty much anyone might throw at it. But then in the Pro models, what you get is the A17 Pro. The A17 Pro is helping to make certain very high-powered tasks possible. Pro-level photo capture, log video recording, and it is greatly extending graphics performance. That last part is leading to the release of AAA video games like Resident Evil 4 Remake. What I find so interesting about this is that Apple is drawing the line in the sand, not just between the base and the Pro models this year, but between the current Pro and Pro Max and literally everything that came before it. The iPhone 15 and probably every base model that comes after will be locked out of a certain portion of the walled garden that is only reserved for the diehards and the hardcore. There isn't necessarily anything wrong with that, but I kind of feel for some of those Apple fans who want as much as possible out of the iPhone iPhone that they can afford, and yet the things that are possible are getting far and beyond what Apple can democratize among their various offerings. But the mixed bag of features felt a little bit better once I plugged the phone in, and realized that I was using one of the many cables I use for basically any other piece of tech. Seriously, this move from the Lightning port to the USB-C port is a big deal regardless of the reasons why it had to happen. I definitely wanted to highlight this because as someone who travels with many different types of tech, it's just much more convenient to be able to charge everything using one particular standard. And that's not even in a macro sense, that is true even in the walled garden itself. Now, the same charger that I use for my MacBook Pro can charge my phone. The charger for my Apple Watch is now something I can plug into my phone in order to top up the wearable. It's just a great development that makes the iPhone a little bit more accessible for all levels of techie. So there's no better time than now if you're getting the new iPhones to upgrade your chargers to make sure that you're getting the best charging speeds no matter what you're plugging in. That's where UGREEN, the sponsor of this video, come in with their Nexode charging solutions. And none blend function and cuteness together better than the Nexode RG 30W and 65W chargers. Yeah, you're seeing this right, it's a little robot. The beauty of GaN charging tech is that the physical chargers can be smaller while still providing super fast charging speeds. So why not make the charger something really cool like this little robot? You have some choice in the wattage, with the 30W RG focusing on charging one device at a time, and the 65W RG allowing for multiple connections via 2 USB-C ports and 1 USB-A. The 65W charger has been a savior during my travels as it fits so easily in my travel kit while charging up 3 items simultaneously. And did I mention there is an even cuter purple Nexode RG charger? It's not just a cute charger, it's got personality. An LED display on all of the chargers shows different expressions based on the charging state of anything that is plugged in. When everything is charged up, the expression changes, giving you extra visual confirmation that RG has done its job well. In terms of charging speeds, in half an hour you can get the iPhone 15 from 0 to 60%. On the iPhone 15 Pro Max, in half an hour you can go from 0 to 50%. And when it's all said and done, just unplug RG, put its shoes back on, yep, the plug cover literally looks like a little pair of shoes, and get moving again because of how travel friendly it all is. GaN chargers like this are super convenient and pair very well with the iPhone 15, but they also help the environment. GaN is way more efficient at energy consumption, and the tech mitigates heat generation, making it a much more eco-friendly charger to have on hand. Get some of the best charging speeds for the iPhone 15 via the Nexode RG 30W and 65W chargers from UGREEN by hitting the links down below. And if you act now, before October 29th, you can get additional savings on each of the Nexode charging solutions. Thanks again to UGREEN for letting me use the Nexode RG chargers and for sponsoring this video. So all of this USB-C goodness is not even factoring how much easier it will be to adapt accessories. The Backbone 1 controller attachment is one great example of an accessory that used to be made in 2 different varieties, but now the single USB-C version works across literally any current smartphone. It did require an update by connecting to an Android phone for a bit at first, but after that, it's working perfectly with the iPhone 15 for games like Genshin Impact and NBA 2K. It's easier for the iPhone user and easier for the accessory companies to not need to split their attention and resources, and I think that's a win-win. Unfortunately, in order to experience that level of win-win, there are some growing pains with this new USB-C port. I was really hopeful that USB-C would mean that everything that didn't work before would work now because the plug is now different, but that hasn't totally been the case. I mentioned a second ago that the Backbone 1 needed an update, and that is likely to adhere the tech to Apple's own underlying software standards. I wish that kind of update procedure was available for everybody, but it's up to the various companies to follow suit. Case in point, my blood sugar meter. I've had the USB-C version of this glucose meter for the longest time now, and I was excited to use it with the new iPhones. But when I plugged it in, the app simply told me that it wasn't compatible. I understand that compatibility issues may still divide iPhones and Android devices, but this was still just a bummer to see happen. There's also another reason why the move to USB-C will hurt for some people. Lightning was around for so long that there will be many people who still need that extra cable lying around. I mean, sure, it's nice that the iPhone 15 got USB-C, but what about the many pairs of AirPods Pro or AirPods Max even that some are still rocking? Those are still Lightning enabled. But the fact remains that if you are excited for USB-C to literally become the standard, Apple is still asking you to shell out more money to buy into it. And in that way, it seems Lightning is striking twice, and Apple is still managing to make off with some extra profit before the plug standard finally fully passes. I do have to give the iPhones their credit on certain aspects, and their cameras are still reliable for people who want to stay around this price point. Apple makes sure that remains the case by upgrading the main sensor on here to a 48 megapixel shooter that comes with many of the expected software enhancements. I will admit that the camera interface is still not one of my favorites. You still have to go over to the settings and find the camera area to access a lot of the different settings you might want to be able to change on the fly. Also, there's no Pro mode anywhere to be found in the camera app still, but that is something that can be fixed by literally downloading a Pro camera app from the App Store. But for anyone that is just trying to capture some memories and perhaps share them on social media or with friends, these cameras still give good quality across the board. That is true especially in video, where using the main sensor still yields some of the best mobile video out there. It's still just a good camera package, and yet another reason why upgrading to the 15 is worthwhile for most people who are still on previous base models. But let me come back to what I said earlier about carrying both an Android phone and an iPhone most of the time now. The main reason why I do it is because the iPhone is basically the work phone now. Just like my MacBook is the work laptop, the iPhone has become what I use to post all of my short form videos. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about recording all of my footage on the iPhones. I'm talking about posting what I edit onto various platforms like Instagram Reels, TikToks, and YouTube Shorts. Here's a perfect example. If I was going to post a reel right now, I can actually go into the advanced settings and schedule the reel. I can't do that on pretty much any of my Android phones. Any YouTube short that I edit on my MacBook and try to post on my Android phone simply won't import properly. It'll just give me an error and then I have to just post it on desktop anyway. But on an iPhone, it imports perfectly fine every single time, and thus it allows me to choose a frame from the video for my thumbnail. And besides, airdropping remains the way to go when getting these edited videos from the work laptop onto the work phone. But I have to admit something. After this video is done, I will be moving back to the Pro Max. While the smaller size of the iPhone 15 is way easier to use on the daily, I have to admit that the extras on the Pro models make me want to stick with them. And if I was shelling out my own money to choose which phone to get, I would probably choose the Pro. Maybe the smaller Pro, not the Pro Max though. But that's obviously because I know what kind of user I am and what experiences I want to have on the Pro Max. I want to be able to play Resident Evil Village when it comes out at the end of October. I want to try shooting more of my core short-form content using the cameras on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. And when shooting in log format, I can probably edit those videos to look really close to my main cameras. I do prefer to be on the cutting edge, so the action button is there, and I want to keep the always on display. It would be easier to stay on the iPhone 15 if at least some of these capabilities were given to the base models, but like I said before, the gap continues to widen between the two segments of the lineup. And while that's okay, it's clear now more than ever that you'll have to really know what you want out of your iPhone, and you'll have to know whether or not you're actually a pro. So in a way, having a new entry point into the iPhones kind of worked. I mean, I'll assume the vast majority of you don't really consider yourselves pros, so not going pro doesn't mean that you're really missing out on too much. All of the features and aspects that I just lamented not having on the iPhone 15 are such specific things to me, and that just won't be the case for many people who are coming into this year's iPhone lineup. With just a few key upgrades over the last base model, the iPhone 15 manages to feel just better enough that it serves as a great entry point into some of the best that Apple has to offer, even if the very best of the company is still out on its own island. If you can swing the extra money for the Pro models, more power to you. Just know that there are some real tangible reasons why those phones are considered the ones for pros. And for everyone else, this is still a great place to be. It's an upgrade that is just different enough to warrant the jump, but just familiar enough that it doesn't require a huge leap of faith. And so, there you have it. What worked and what didn't with the iPhone 15. I'm somewhat surprised at how much I actually used the iPhone 15 since getting it, and I have to chalk that up to how this size and simplicity remain big factors in what I choose to use on the daily. That being said, it is still a base model, and despite some changes towards Apple's present, it is still short of the, let's call, future-proofing that was afforded to the pros. So I wanted to talk about the iPhone 15 for a bit, but also use it as a way of pontificating on Apple's general mindset with this year's smartphones. I want to give a big thanks again to UGREEN for sponsoring this video. Make sure you get into the description and in the pinned comment below to check out the RG Nexode 30-watt and 65-watt chargers, which pair really well with the USB-C iPhones that came out this year. But from there, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me again today. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and enjoy your tea, everybody. Whew, there was so much in that video.